Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Substack. I'm Ron Ritchie, and I'm the author of Managing in the Age of Uncertainty newsletter here on Substack. And this week, I'm going to be using video. I'm giving a presentation to a number of college deans at a local community college. And so, what I thought I would do in my newsletter this week is to record a video of the slides I'm using to give, first of all, a chance for all of us to actually meet each other in person and see the person behind the newsletter, but also to share sort of a summary view of the perspective I have and what we cover in the newsletter about how all of us can be better managers as we look into this age of uncertainty. So I'm going to try to do this in about 10 minutes, and we'll see how it goes. And I look forward to your feedback and how you like this week's newsletter in video format. Anybody who's read my newsletter knows that I structure it in a why, what, how format. I like this logical format so you know what's coming. Start with the most important question, why? Be clear about what someone can do in order to be better at the why, and then, of course, be specific about the how. I know managers don't get much development today, so I actually spend a lot of time on the how so that I can be practical and pragmatic. And so tomorrow, when I'm with the deans, the first question I'm going to be asking is why, right? And why is really built around, and what I write about is what is the most profound impact of AI on humanity? It's a little bit hyperbolic when you ask it in that context. But if you look at it through the lens of employment, and what does it mean to people who are looking for jobs, have jobs, or want to grow into a career, it's really a fundamental question about what is different than is going to change in the future and is changing right now as we listen to this. And to me, the biggest shift about what's different, where the real impact from an employment lens on AI is really what I call the death of the corporate ladder. For the current generation, whether millennial, Gen Z, and other emerging cohorts in the workplace, AI has created a sense of uncertainty about how career pathing is going to evolve, and has effectively brought the corporate ladder to the end, or to the last, it's on fumes, if you will, as we move into the future and companies reinvent themselves around the potential of AI. And this is a big change because life on the ladder was pretty good. You had a predictable path, maybe spent 5, 10, 15, 20 years at a company, moving up a broad range of grade levels, and knowing that you had a path of growth in front of you. You were expected to stay at a single company. It's weird and as upside down as it sounds to say this today. Career loyalty was actually expected when you were on the ladder. Now, all of us who were on the ladder loved it because it ultimately led to good things, but it came with its compromises. It wasn't always about your performance. A lot of what you did was dependent on your manager's reputation and whether your manager could move you forward on the timetable that they could. It also wasn't the most empowered way of working. It was a very hierarchically driven way of working. It was difficult to have a seat at the table and speak for your manager, and so that made it sometimes difficult to excel. But it was okay because you were still on the ladder. And finally, it was really an environment that sort of drove people toward conformity. And colloquially here, I'm calling it the company man brand, right? Where you sort of, did you fit into the corporate politics of the organization, which is kind of a crummy way to be evaluated on your performance. But when you add all these up, as good as the ladder was, when people did find issues about wanting to leave, it really came down to the number one reason why boomers left their job was their manager. And it really was because of the outside effect a manager could have on your ability to get ahead, right? But this is different from what's happening today. Today, what's happening is we're seeing a complete different view of how things are done in the workplace, to really move from being on a ladder to telling a story. And that's the metaphor that I like to describe it. It's a story, it's a narrative, because a story and a narrative is typically told in acts or in chapters. And I know that when I work through the research that I've done, the people that I talk to, the people I currently manage, I do manage millennials and Gen Z, is that they know they don't have the ladder. And so what they're looking for is roles on a team that will allow them to write a chapter in a story, a chapter so compelling, a bestseller, that it will be impossible to not be recognized. And, if you put that in context to what, is the number one reason why people leave a job today, it totally makes sense, because people leave a job today if they don't see the opportunities for growth and advancement. And so that's different from boomers. And I think, from my perspective as a boomer, I think it's really important that we cut millennials and Gen Z and future generations a little bit of slack over potentially having more jobs than us, and in working in more companies than us, because this generation has no other choice than to constantly question the potential of a job role to advance their careers. In the age of uncertainty, a job role has to have an opportunity to write that best-selling chapter, or it's time to move on to another place where maybe that role can lead you to that. Because when you look at the difference between the ladder and career as a story, it's not a predictable path, it's a chapter by chapter path. It's not as dependent on the manager, it's more self-directed growth. You're driving your own career. It's definitely not single company, it's going to be many companies on your journey. And while it isn't always easy to achieve this, the best of this generation is looking for roles where they're empowered. I completely disagree with what people say oftentimes about millennials and Gen Z. Millennials and Gen Z want to own their work. They want to be held accountable because they want to shine on their manager's dashboard. And ultimately, they're trying to create a reputation independent of their manager, independent of the company they're at, so that they can build that credibility they need to really show that they're ready for the next chapter in their story. Giant shift for how people move forward in their careers. Now, a big part of what I write about in this newsletter is these big picture questions about the changes that are taking place in the workplace, but I also want to be pragmatic and practical. And so one of the things that you'll see when you look at career as a story that I believe in, it's really important to understand what are the characteristics of a role that allows someone to write that chapter of a career story. And I call that the 5 dots of a career story. And the best of this generation are looking for job roles where they can connect these dots, where one, they can connect a job and make it tangible, that they can hold their box of responsibilities in their hands and see how it aligns to their manager's dashboard, that they can look at that box of responsibility and that role and understand how it's playing to their strengths and gives them that opportunity to really showcase the special talents that they have. Does the role create a pathway up? Is it possible to move in a sort of upward motion in the job role? And does it give you an opportunity to scale that job out, to maybe have an opportunity to translate that skill into other opportunities? Finance and accounting are a great way to have a skill set that allows you to look at finance as well as investing, and other areas, like insurance and whatnot, where these skills are really able you to scale up and out. So they want that pathway in their job. And that empowerment really matters, because in navigating an organization really comes down to how empowered you are. And so this generation looks for empowered job roles. And ultimately, when you put all that together, really people want to be able to build a reputation around their performance. People want signature projects that allow them to basically say, this job role has prepared me for the next role. So the 5 dots of a career story are what really define what the best people in the marketplace are looking for. And that is, you look at these 5 dots, they're significantly different from what boomers had when they were looking to drive themselves and move up the corporate ladder. Now, if you take this why, you have to ask yourself, well, what can managers do about it? If this is the big change that's taking place for individual contributors on a team, how do managers adapt? What do managers need to do in order to be able to grow their skill set and adapt to these changes? And that's what my research looked at. I really wanted to understand, how does the future of managing change? And for me, I was trying to really look at sort of the challenges that managers have today. And managing today is not like it was when I was, a line manager in my early days of my career. Today, managers have twice as many direct reports as boomer managers had. Spans are much wider, fewer layers, more direct reports. And companies don't really put an investment in training their managers. More than 50% of all first-time managers receive no formal training, which is mind-boggling to me. And so the number may even be higher when you think about how many people go into managing but aren't really people who want to be managers. And then the challenge on this is that development and developing people is now the exception. It's not the rule. Managers spend less than 10% of their time developing their team. And that's really, ultimately in the end is how do you help someone build a career story if you're not helping them develop? And that's what I've invested in, is to understand what do people want from their managers. And so this is the research I've done to really understand what values in a manager inspire millennials and Gen Z to recommend a manager to their friends and colleagues. Done this work over the last number of years, and what I talk about in this newsletter is based on this research. And what I found in this research is that the key to being a great manager today is consistency. And if you think about it, it totally makes sense. If you're faced with a world that is very uncertain, what's the one thing that you wish you had from a manager? It's consistency. And in many ways, consistency is the opposite of uncertainty. And that's why it's such a valuable skill to exhibit as a manager. Are you consistent in your actions and behaviors in the age of uncertainty? If you take that broad idea, what we found in the research is we were able to drill down into that to basically say, what are the key drivers of consistency? What are the specific actions and behaviors that today's generation look for in a manager? And we identified 6 that were statistically significant. And they're on, I covered each one of these, of course, in my newsletter, but let me give a high level summary of them. The first driver of consistency is talent today is looking for alignment. Is it easy or hard to align a job role to the results that are on a manager's dashboard so that people can make sure that their job role is going to be something that managers care about? So alignment of a role to goals and metrics. The second is accountability. Does the manager do what they say they're going to do? This is super important. If you shine on someone's dashboard, is the manager going to follow through and put themselves on the line for that person, right? This generation are looking for managers who will fight for them and to get them recognized. It's also important as a manager to be authentic to this generation. And that's why mindset is so important. This generation really wants to understand how you're wired, how you think about things. They want to understand you so that they understand how to be, predictable within the way your mind works and the way you think about problem solving. But it's not just the way you're wired, it's also the way you operate the team. And that's why process is important to this generation. They're looking for managers who operate the team within a consistent set of processes. And that's important because while they want to know you authentically in your mindset, people today also know they need to work within the system that a manager has. And they want the manager to share that system so they know how to excel within it and to be predictable in a world that is anything but predictable. Facts are fundamental to this generation. In my generation, people could make any fact mean anything. In this generation, they're looking for managers who operate from a single scorecard of success. They want to be able to know that they can see themselves on the scorecard, that they can put that measurement into the way they think about their job so that they can understand how to excel and exceed expectations. And then finally, but last but not least, is listening. Often in my generation was no news is good news. That's the opposite of what this generation wants. What they're looking for are managers who are on top of what's working and what's not working on the team. People don't have time to stay in job roles if things are not working, and they're looking for a manager who understands that and can help them right the ship. So when you step back as a manager in today's world, and this is what I write about in Managing in the Age of Uncertainty, these are the 6 fundamental actions and behaviors that this current generation of talent looks for in a manager, and are all fundamentally rooted in this idea of, am I consistent in the way I apply these 6 drivers in the way I manage my team? So it's a pretty clear fundamental skill set about what people need to do. This is what I write about inside my newsletter, but I also make it possible to create a self-assessment as a manager of your own skills. So if you're a manager looking at this and you're interested on how do you do on the 6 drivers of consistency, just click through this QR code. You'll see any of my newsletters feature a link to a self-assessment. In addition, of course, it's not just enough to self-assess yourself. It's unbelievably important as a manager to get feedback from the outside on your strengths and weaknesses on the 6 drivers. Your self-perceptions might be pretty accurate, but they might and probably aren't as accurate as you think they are. Use this QR code to access a free account if you want to have an account where you can both see your self-assessment and compare your scores to what your peers or people on your team think about the way you perform against the 6 drivers. That feedback is fundamental to growth and development as a manager. And you don't need to be great at all 6. You just need to know where you're strong and weak so you can develop strategies and approaches for the places where you're not as strong as you wish you were, but also emphasize the parts of the 6 drivers that you're particularly strong on. So feedback is essential to have a development platform, and that's what you can experience through this software tool that I've built. Now, above and beyond getting feedback on yourself, the question is, how do you put this to work in the real world, right? And how do you go from, talking about this to taking action? And so for me, a big part of what I do is I like to provide frameworks to try to be consistent. If you've got these 5 dots on of a career story, what are the key manager actions associated with each one of those? And I'm just going to drill down on one of those in specific in this video: alignment, right? How do you really make a job role tangible? Because to me, the single most important action a manager can take in order to help their team write a chapter of a career story is to focus on alignment, to ensure that every job role on the team, all the box of responsibilities that are in that job role, can be found and aligned to what's on a manager's dashboard of priorities, goals, and metrics. Now, that's easier to say than it is to do, and that's why I recommend the following toolbox. If you really want to focus on aligning every job, 100% of every job role, to your priorities, goals, and metrics, I recommend that you use these 3 tools. You work through a common vocabulary, so everybody speaks the same language. There's no opting out. That you're really clear about what the shared goals are of the team. It's really important to separate what's important from what's urgent, because what important is what matters. On your dashboard of success, what matters is your goals, and that's what you want your people focused on. And then finally, a common set of metrics, those common facts that will allow everybody to tell the same story from the same metric system of how they have driven success on your team. I don't really care what common vocabulary you use. Cisco used VSEM, Salesforce used VitaMom, many companies use OKRs or OGSM. Doesn't matter. If you have a common vocabulary, that will empower the people on your team to have a direct line of sight from their job role to your priorities, your goals, and the leading and lagging indicators or metrics that are on your dashboard. And if you look at that, there's a certain degree of elegant simplicity to being able to see that direct line of sight between what function you're in, what title you have, what responsibilities you have, and how that rolls up on a manager's dashboard. Remember, if you're on some manager's dashboard and you are exceeding expectations, that is going to give you a chance to get recognized and rewarded. And that's what the best of this generation is looking for, this simple ability to align. And when you do it well, you absolutely can connect the dots. You can shape your growth by making sure that you're in the right organization functionally and with the right title. You can put your tangibleness of that growth into easy understanding by seeing what goal you're responsible for. You can see what pathways it'll create by really understanding the functional relationship you have to execution. Owning something on a priority list gives you the empowerment you need to navigate the organization. And finally, when you can measure outsized impact, it's going to create that empowered reputation for the people on your team. So this really does that 5 story dots, the connecting can happen through this process: tangible, growth, pathway, navigation, and empowerment. I hope that in the end, what this adds up to is that everybody has a chance to write a career story, or at least a chapter in a career story, that is as popular as Breaking Bad. And that's ultimately the goal of a manager, is to empower the people on your team to be able to tell this kind of story and to tell it in the same kind of compellingness that you might have from a bestseller. That's what I wanted to share today, to make sure that all of us are managing in the age of uncertainty to the best of our abilities and doing the best we can to help our people tell career stories. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Look forward to hearing some feedback about it. Thanks, and I'll talk to you next week.